Hi,
How
this is
you
Robert
doing?
Shear with another edition of Sheer Intelligence, where the intelligence comes from my guests. Otherwise, it would be an incredibly boastful title given to me by the NPR station KCRW in Santa Monica, where I did this for, I guess, 5, 6 years. But now, thanks to Donald Trump, NPR is no longer as receptive. So and you can get it on Apple, Spotify, you get it on Share Posts, and so forth. But I'm really happy to have our guest today, uh, Ted Hamm, but Theodore Hamm. Let's give him full credit. He has a PhD from UC Davis, which I didn't know until I was reading his latest book. And he's really one of our most important journalists. And I don't like to go on too long. I always do, but I shouldn't go on too long with these introductions. But he's really the best. He's actually from Chicago, but he's the best chronicler of New York, the New York scene politically that I know of. He's the go-to person, very sharp, and he's written what I consider to be the best thing on Zoran uh, Mamdani, and who were days before the election in New York. He tells me the polls shows Mandami in the lead, maybe by quite a bit. This will be amazing in the context of current politics because everybody's thinking, what's the alternative to Trump? And basically, it's we have to sell out, and the Democrats have to become more like Trump or something. And the argument of this book really, as I read it, is that what this guy is in favor of on all issues, including the controversial matter of the rights of Palestinians, the sentiment in the world is pretty much there, and in America, that this is not some outlier, and so it should not be surprising that he's doing well. And as a longtime New Yorker, I was born there in the middle of the Depression, 1936. What he favors for New York, we took as the norm. Certainly, rent control was the norm. Certainly, support. Oh God, I was born in the middle of the Depression. Certainly, support for food at reasonable prices, helped by government control of pricing. And strong labor movement. And politically, when I was a kid in New York, they had two communists on the city council. They had three from the left Labor Party, American Labor Party, which the New York Post, now a right wing rag, was actually quite left in those days. And then there were other papers. PM was a very prominent one. Congressman Vito Marcantonio, who ran because he had open primaries, he at one point was a Republican, a Democrat, and ALP. He actually ran a strong race for mayor, I believe. Was it mayor? He ran some citywide race, and I remember all my Italian friends, and Christopher Columbus High School and everything. They liked him, So what's being considered, yes, Democratic Socialist Association is wild, but actually. This is as American as apple pie in what used to be our politics. And let me just begin with that. What is so different about Zoran Mamdani from Franklin Roosevelt? Franklin Roosevelt actually favored a lot of these things. And let me throw one little footnote. Even Richard Nixon at one point favored a guaranteed annual income. You know, so it's just a sign that we've gone so, and most of the world favors some kind of democratic socialism, some kind of, mixed economy in which there's an important, and we have a huge public sector. We are a social society, but for the rich, because we have a huge public sector. And in Silicon Valley, they're all kissing Trump's ring now because they all want to be defense contractors. They're all got tremendous amount of government money. So really cut through the verbiage here, put on your PhD hat, and tell us where we are historically.
Well, thanks first for the very generous introduction, Bob. It's good to be back with you. When we last spoke 5 years ago, we were talking about my book, Bernie's Brooklyn, which was also published by Orr Books. And I was tracing a lot of the FDR stuff and LaGuardia era policies that you mentioned, which I would also add low cost healthcare into that mix. And that was something more, I guess that's not something that Mamdani has been particularly emphasizing, but it was part of
Oh,
that era.
guaranteed also by strong unions.
Oh yeah,
My mother was a garment worker. She worked until she was 65 while I was still in graduate school because she didn't want to lose her benefits. No, even under, David Dubinsky and the ILGW, workers had these rights and funeral, burial, and everything else, So,
yes.
yeah, good
Well,
point.
the it's interesting about the unions because when he ran in the primary, he didn't run with the backing of almost. He only had one small union, the UAW's local, which mainly represents graduate students in the various colleges in New York City. So but once he won in June, all the unions came on board and they've been quite active. So you got the hotel workers, the healthcare workers, teachers, and so on. So that's part of why he's started to amass this very formidable coalition. As you said earlier, the latest polls show him up with reaching 50%, doubling the total of Cuomo, and actually Sliwa, the Republican, Curtis Sliwa, is only a few points behind Cuomo. So Mamdani's clearly in the driver's seat. There's still a few days left to go, but things do look good, and largely because he has the large unions behind him at this point.
No thanks to the New York Times, let alone the New York Post or the Daily News. I mean, the media has been, I read, I think, two or three columns in the New York Times just this week or last week, savaging this guy. Oh, I'm a Jew and I can't vote for him and so forth. Well, I'm a Jew and I wish I had the opportunity to, and I noticed there's a lot of Jewish people in prominent positions in his campaign.
Sure. Well, several members of his inner circle are Jewish, and yeah, many Jewish voters, liberal Jewish voters, rally behind him. In the primary, there was ranked choice voting, so he got 470,000 first place votes, and then he got many of a large percentage of Brad Lander, the Jewish city comptroller, essentially the city's chief financial officer, and so Mamdani got a lot of those votes. So he ended up reaching nearly 600,000 votes with a significant number of Jewish votes. So Brad Lander, in fact, said after the primary, he said that can be explained by the fact that many liberal Jews were objecting to being used as pawns by the Netanyahu regime, right? So Israel Palestine was certainly the flashpoint of controversy, and I think it really backfired throughout the campaign. We can talk about that. But going back to what you said about the Times, their just recently, this was actually just yesterday, their expert panel that in June declared Mamdani unfit for office. Most of the same people were on the expert panel yesterday that said he was the best candidate of the three. So they've certainly come around, but they were very harsh in June during the primary, and saying he was not qualified, had no experience, that he had disrespected Michael Bloomberg and all this other stuff that they were saying at the time. So one of the things that I show in the book is that New York Post, for whatever else you can say about the Post, there's no uncertainty about where they stand on a particular person or issue, right? So they didn't like Mamdani and relentlessly tried to take him down, but they were open about that, and it was very clear it was ideological, that he's a socialist and also pro-Palestine. Now the Times is a little more circumspect, so they're kind of saying, well, he's not experienced, he doesn't have management credentials and all this. But they were, you could tell between the lines they were saying the same things the Post was, just in New York Times highfalutin terms, right? So what I'm arguing basically in the book is that, or showing in the book, is that the Times basically turned into the New York Post, at least during the primary. They've tried to regain their footing since then, as I just mentioned, with the recent endorsement. It's not a full fledged endorsement. It's as an expert recommendation that they assemble this panel that recommends who the best candidate is.
Well, that raises an interesting question about the role of mass media. In your book, you talk a lot about social media. and it's the most positive. I also teach in communications, as you're a professor and run, what is it, St. Joseph's College? I should give them a plug.
St.
You're in
Joseph's
charge.
University in New York, SJNY, in Clinton Hill, Brooklyn, historic part of
Yeah,
Brooklyn.
and you're the chair of the Department of
Journalism, yeah,
Communications,
journalism,
journalism,
yeah.
and so social interesting because social media is always presented these days as a negative, threatening democracy, and all that. But I find my students to be sharper than I think any generation I've seen so far. And certainly on a matter like Israel, I mean, you dare criticize Israel, you'll be called anti-Semitic. Well, people can now see the pictures. They can now hear other points of view, and it's caused, I think, a great deal of enlightenment. But in your book, and by the way, let me plug this book forthrightly here, because we're not going to be. This is not a substitute for reading it. This is one of the great changes in American politics. Let's cut to the chase. If this guy wins, I'm not as optimistic. But then again, I'm in California. But if this guy wins, it's a big game changer for American politics. It opens a lot of doors. He's already done that. He's not the lone member of the assembly. Your book recounts that this is part of a much larger movement of accepting. What are we accepting? We're not accepting socialism. We're accepting the notion that maybe having 24 billionaires who can weigh in on an election, or we have one of the richest men in the country can be invited by the president to revamp the whole federal government. And meanwhile, the president is also has his family making deals, making policy. I mean, we are in a caricature of capitalism. Let's
Well,
face
I think
that.
you gotta inflate your terms there. It's not millionaires, it's billionaires, and now Musk is
Oh,
talking
I'm
about
sorry. Did I say millionaires?
trillionaires.
No. Oh,
Yeah,
millionaires. Millionaires is
trillionaires.
chump change
Yeah,
now. I mean,
right.
God, even some professors have that, now, the ones who are more well behaved. But, no, but seriously, what are we talking about here? What is this socialism? I mean, you're talking about England now, right? And what, don't they have a socialist back in power? And he's horrible in many ways, right? I
Well,
mean,
he's the Labor Party, right? But that
yeah, yeah, but I mean, you can't. You clearly look. Socialists have been U.S. imperialists too. You celebrate Debs, a great socialist. One thing I love about your book. First of all, let me assure people this is not one of these big tomes. It's 219 pages. It's brilliantly written. It's clear. It raises questions. I actually a little bit groggy because I was late to my homework here. I had, read or dipped into the book a couple of times before when we were going to do this. But last night I read it. It was a joy. Okay, let me just say that
thank you
this
very
is
much.
not tedious. It's not full of jargon. It tells you what it's like to grow up in Queens these days, or in Brooklyn, and it goes slow on the celebrating the gentrification of Brooklyn, which I find a caricature of what Brooklyn used to be. But then again, I'm a Bronx guy also, and that's left out of the glory days of gentrification to this day. But seriously, it's a great book, and what it does, it cuts to really the great pain in America, but from I hate to use the word progressive since so many sellout people use that word to justify themselves, including people who are opposed to his campaign. But the fact of the matter is, there's a lot of pain in this country. And the pain is either going to be met by uh, buying tickets to the lottery and hoping that Elon Musk will carry you through this, or it's going to be by bringing life back to unions. By the way, I support the UAW where I teach as well. The graduate student stuff and the faculty, non-tenured faculty, it's really, I think, important to be able to be teachers in an independent way. But what the issues that he's raising are the bread and butter issues that the Democratic Party abandoned. The Democratic Party abandoned workers in America. It was even pointed out by the leaders of the Teamsters when he spoke at the Republican convention. There's a lot of reason you could criticize him, but he was making a point why working people would not be happy with the Democrats. And to me, it's something I always bring up. Let me bring it up with you because you're a scholar these things and put it in this context. When Donald Trump said he was debating Hillary Clinton, and she said, he says he's going to make America great again. And America has always been great. To my mind, that was the signature failure of what used to be called liberalism or whatever. First of all, the idea that America was always great. When we genocide against Native America, I don't go through the whole list. Slavery, segregation, the Democratic Party was based in the segregated South right up to the '64. I mean, just incredible. Where has she been living? What is she thinking? But also, as your book points out, and let's get back to the book, a lot of our problems go back to Bill Clinton. They go back to a form of liberalism that was almost a welcoming to a kind of fascism. Put government at the service of big industry. If we want to be talk really about the prospect of fascism, which is real danger now, what happened in Germany was you had this wild man Hitler and the movement he represented feeding off the deep discontent in the society. Great hardship for a lot of people, and what happened? The big capitalist companies, Mercedes, right, and BMW, and the big aircraft, they supported Hitler, and they did it in the name. In the name. This is why there's an echo with what happened with the New York Times this time around. Before maybe they changed slightly. They did it in the name of efficiency. At least the trains will run on time. At least we won't have these socialists and communists here, and at least we'll be able to go after Russia or something, Uh, so take us to this whole history. This, since we've talked about it, this word socialism. One of the things that's great about your book is you explain why this is not something that should be hidden. That this is what makes you hope that this guy will not be a sellout. That this campaign could actually bring about some real change, because real change is what we need.
Yeah. Well, I think that part of what you're talking about with the billionaires and
Could you sit back a little bit? Because
yes,
otherwise, yeah,
yeah,
okay.
okay. So with the billionaires and the fantastic amount of wealth that they possess, I think that opens the door for the language of socialism, right? Because when you discuss redistributing wealth, people can intuitively recognize that some people have too much wealth, and it should be more just evenly distributed in whatever way possible, right? So I think that has helped make the language of democratic socialism a lot more palatable for mainstream Democrats, at least in New York City. Of course, it's going to be different across the United States, but New York City has a long tradition of liberal Democrats in holding office and sustained by large numbers of union voters and so on. So I think that yes, he can make that his case in the name of democratic socialism because now and it doesn't threaten people the way it once did. The Cold War is long gone, and the people can say, well, yes, we should make it easier for people to survive in the city. And it's not just working class people too. One of the main items on his agenda is universal child care, and that affects not working class people, but middle class people and upper middle class and rich people. Everybody pays a lot of money for child care in the city, and everyone who has kids can relate to that fact and knows that making that more affordable is going to help everybody. And that's something. So that's something he can connect with a wide cross section of voters, parents, essentially across the city. But going
Yeah,
back to
but
what you
this,
can I just answer what you said about Hillary and Trump and the nostalgia, essentially? I mean, I think that's their appeal, making America great, or it always was great, and so on. That is their era and their perspective, right? But Zoran is certainly oriented towards the future. He and his generation, right? They're discussing what's next, and I think that's something that has helped him campaign against Cuomo, who's very clearly from the Clinton era and endorsed by Bill Clinton in the primary and touts his work as HUD secretary under Bill Clinton and so on, and touts his father, Mario Cuomo, whenever he can. So he's talking about the past, and Zoran saying, okay, here's what we're going to do once I get in office to help people gain their secure their foothold for the future, right? So make life more affordable, freezing the rent for the people, the tenants and rent stabilized housing, city run program, basically city-run rent control, and childcare, as I mentioned, fast and free buses, all these things, publicly run grocery stores, stuff that people who followed the campaign to some extent have heard him say. But it all sort of fits together in an agenda for the future, right? He's not saying, "Here's let's go back to what how things were 20 years ago, 30 years ago, or 50 years ago, or whatever it might be." He's saying, let's talk about tomorrow."
Let me take issue with something you just said about this idea of socialism. And really, what we're talking about is childcare, pre-kindergarten, so people can have children. And, let's say you're even what they used to call a right to lifer, but does it mean you have to have poverty and not be able to work, and the woman cannot have a career and so forth? And so these kinds of programs, let me tell you, I benefited from them as a kid. I actually, my mother wasn't married when she had me. Okay, it could happen to white people, and but my father then came into the picture and was great. But they both were garment workers, and I went to very good public schools. In fact, went right through City College. And it's one thing that you mentioned there in your book about whether tuition should be free at a college. And you have a couple of people who've actually advocated it. Well, when I went to City College, not only was tuition free, but the big issue at City College then in the 1950s was suddenly you had to buy textbooks. They used to have free textbooks when you went to the City College system in New York. And those, by the way, to bring up the Jewish issue, the Ivy Leagues weren't accepting Jewish New Yorkers, and nor were the big social clubs in California or anywhere else. And so Jews were generally poor. In fact, it was a common part of the workforce, and that progressive tradition was launched there. But I want to say something about the country. The When I was a kid, we were envious of people who were auto workers, steel workers, coal miners. Why? Because they made more money than garment workers. Okay, and they had a stronger union than the garment workers union. The steel workers union, the coal miners union, United Auto Workers that you mentioned, the Ford Local 600. So, my relatives who, were like welders and things like that, working in those kind of unions, they could actually get a car. They could buy a house. And then, of course, you had the socialist programs of the GI Bill. People had gone into the armed forces, recruited into it, but they came out with benefits, including education benefits and so forth. So most of the world does not have any problem at all with this word socialist. And my hat's off to the Democratic Socialists of America for sticking with the word. And it's one of the reasons I think people should read your book, because you're not chicken about this. You just put it right out there and say this is an essential part of our education, not as a matter of doctrine or propaganda or for some ideological view, but a recognition government is really important. The Silicon Valley knows that. The internet came out of a Defense Department program. Palantir, which leads the way on getting information that can be used for surveillance, and its only client for the first 3 years was the CIA. Okay, the CIA through InQtel invested in Palantir. Was a big investor.
Yeah.
So this whole idea of what is socialism, what we're really talking about is, should government serve the interests of the public, right? Or the billionaires? It's that simple. It really is just that simple. And the grotesque use of their $1 billion funds to control the political environment now. And what is exciting about this campaign, and if your insight proves to be accurate, why it will energize people, it's possible to beat them.
Yes.
This guy has beat them. Let's talk about that. I mean, let's talk in
Well, I
World
think
Series terms or something. I don't know.
okay.
Right?
It's
Without
World
the big
Series.
budget of the Dodgers, maybe Toronto, who
Well,
knows? I don't want to
Toronto has
go
a big
into that.
budget too, but yeah. Well, I think one thing that's important is that the New York City DSA, which is the local chapter of the
Please
national
sit back or I'll better, yeah,
organization.
because,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
the
yeah.
local chapter of the national organization, the New York City DSA, right, the Democratic Socialists of America. They're different from the national organization. They tend to be just, it's a long debate, but let's just say they tend to be more practical in what they intend to accomplish, and so their platform is very realistic. They helped Zoran form his platform or develop his platform, and it's achievable, right? That's something that they're careful not to overpromise, because that then they can't deliver, and they don't. That's politics as usual. So basically, what they're proposing, the key planks in that platform, the rent freeze that I mentioned, and childcare, and fast and free buses, and those are things that the city can help fund and provide those things realistically within his first 4 years, or at least be moving clearly in the direction in some of those cases, at least with childcare and free buses. And maybe it's not going to be 100% free in his first or second year, but it's going to be increased moving in that direction, a clear emphasis, and people will see it. Voters would ideally would see that and reelect it, right? So they're being strategic and knowing what they can and cannot accomplish with the rent freeze. That was something that the New York City DSA immediately recognized, that the current mayor, Eric Adams, was in the hip pocket of the landlord lobby and pushing for rent increases. And the DSA activists and elected officials immediately started protesting, and Zoran picked up on that and joined in on those protests. But it's not what that wasn't his initiative per se. Whereas the buses was something that he was much more instrumental in creating. Childcare had been around since 2021, when the progressive candidate Maya Wiley made it her main issue. And going back to De Blasio, he was a progressive Democrat, and I know the term gets overused, like you said, but he was rolling out a very significant program, universal pre-kindergarten, that benefited not just children in schools and their pedagogical growth, but also parents who save money with the kids in school. Right, they save money on daycare, so it was a very successful initiative, and that's sort of the basis for Zoran's childcare model, right? Trying to expand a universal childcare program. So that's, there are some legacies he's building on and some new initiatives he's developed, but it's all achievable, and I think that's a main that's why making the agenda realistic, and makes it easy to deliver. Right, his canvassers go out, knock on doors, and they can repeat the three core pledges. It's a mantra for them, and so on. So it all kind of flowed together. And you asked earlier about social media. So the way he built his campaign was initially via social media recognition, attention, and that then helped him get funding, small donations. Public financing is a very key component of how he succeeded. Right, we have 8-to-1 matching funds in New York City, so he needed to get some attention in order to get more donations, and that helped him then pay for a larger campaign that could sponsor the volunteers to go out and knock on doors. So everything kind of worked together in that regard. So the having a clear message is also a key component of that too, right? So when the canvassers go out and knock on people's doors, they can easily deliver that message. And so everything just kind of flowed together and kept growing and growing, and eventually reaching over 1.6 million voters in the primary. I don't know what the total number will be in the general election, but now they're talking about 90,000 volunteers, and these are staggering numbers, right? So this is just a really dynamic operation, and it succeeded beyond anyone's wildest dreams.
Yeah, but it should be made clear, even if it is not always to the New York Times, that historically, what he is advocating pretty much approximated the reality of life in New York City when I was growing up. I mean, I remember rent control was the norm. After I went through the Second World War. We had victory gardens, we had food support. So coming out of the war, we were used to, thanks to Franklin Delano Roosevelt on the national, but also locally, uh, people like LaGuardia, but even Dwyer, as I recall,
Yep.
uh, they thought they were in government to help us. And it wasn't to help us be idle. I went on to pay a lot of taxes in my life thanks to a very good public education system in New York. I didn't like Moldani. I didn't go to science high school. I went to Christopher Columbus, but it gave me a good education. He benefited from other things that people can do. Some good. Occasionally private schools and scholarship. I'm not opposed to any of that. But the fact of the matter is that growing up in New York City, and this I feel some expertise, but I'm sure it also happened in Chicago and happened in Detroit and other places. I know it happened in California. My goodness, that's what I wanted to get to, by the way, before. The idea of government having to do more for people was a national uh, cause. On every level, whether it was racial equality, but economic justice, and everybody forgets what happened after World War II. And unfortunately, the Democrats were very involved with this. And, in some ways, moderate Republicans could be better than the Democrats, but they participated in the destruction of trade unions. We had, in red
Yes.
baiting, the Cold War. That's an ugly history, Taft-Hartley. And they made it very difficult for unions to organize. And even though the unions had backed the Democrats never defended the unions. So much of the progress that we had in this country that was a model for the world after the war, of a growing middle class that had been celebrated as a key thing to American democracy, and that the public mattered and had to be taken care of, was abandoned. And so I haven't read anything that he has proposed that I didn't think was the norm. When I was growing up, we did have childcare. I know because I benefited from it. But I'll give you one little thing I was thinking when I was reading your book. When I was a kid, not only do we have rent control, but I remember we went without a refrigerator for 2 years because we were a test case in my tenement, whether the landlord had to give us a new refrigerator without raising the rent. And for 2 years, I had to go to a neighbor and get our milk from their refrigerator. And the climate in New York City, and I think that's something the Post would have supported. And certainly a lot of papers, and maybe even the New York Times, although we didn't read the New York Times, that was for rich people. But I just want to get to the two provocative things about this campaign. One is that word socialism. And my feeling, and your book has a lot of detail about this, there isn't anything this guy's talking about that wouldn't have been embraced by Mayor LaGuardia, uh, and, certainly by many people in New York, was as the norm you know
Sure.
and and the other thing I want to get back to before, well, you're a bit generous with the time so we can go on a little bit. I want to talk about this Jewish issue, anti-Semitism. And one of the powerful things that I read about in your book about he was so clear early on to say that being critical of Israel is not being anti-Semitic. And in fact, what I feel very strongly is that those Jewish people in New York who are breaking with AIPAC are the ones who are saving the tradition of Jewish people as being concerned about others, as having decent values, of not being parochial. And they are feeding the most vicious anti-Semitic canard when they oppose a progressive candidate like this in the name of being Jewish, that Jews have to vote against a guy who's in favor of rent control and he's for decency and for honoring everyone. What that is
Yeah.
redefining the religion in a way that I think most Jewish people, certainly in my day, would have found deeply offensive. And I just put one little note. When Franklin Delano Roosevelt died, I went out in the street to find out what was happening. I was, young kid. People were crying like I have never seen in this country. And I've covered a lot of politics. But I'll tell you, in my Jewish section of the Bronx, Roosevelt was, can't say he's a god, but he certainly was this considered this incredible human being, and people were really tearing up, including vets and from the war and everything else. And I know that was a citywide. I'm sure that
Yes.
happened in Italian, Irish, Puerto Rican, black neighborhoods, and so forth.
Well, what you're describing is comparable to Bernie Sanders' experience growing up when he still calls the neighborhood Flatbush, but now everyone refers to it as Midwood. But his neighborhood was very pro Roosevelt. His family, his mother was very pro Eleanor Roosevelt, and so that was a reality in that day that people liked Roosevelt because he and his administration, Eleanor included, they were looking out for people and trying to make sure that people's basic necessities were met. Now, I think fast forwarding to the present with the two related questions you asked. I mean, so basically, with socialism is not on the agenda for the mainstream Democratic Party leadership. They are simply complacent with the status and think the status quo works because it keeps electing them, but they don't think they need to expand that electorate or reach out and provide for the members of their own coalition. And Chuck Schumer, for example, as I quote in the book, he told New York Times columnist Bret Stephens, that his job is to keep the left pro-Israel, which is, and if that's his job, he's not doing it very well because it has not worked out. I don't know how he assumed or who assigned him that job, but that's what he claimed it to be, right? So I'm not Jewish, so I don't like to um, weigh in on what Jewish intra-Jewish politics, but Cuomo does, he certainly, and Whitney Tilson, this other billionaire, an actual billionaire in the race,
Well,
uh,
so does Donald Trump, by the
right,
way.
right,
Consider the chutzpah of it.
yeah,
My father was a German Lutheran, my mother was Jewish, but the idea that any German person, and I'm not blaming all the German people, my God, but if you're going to talk about the Holocaust and you're going to talk about anti-Semitism, come on, you don't blame the Palestinians. The absurdity, you don't blame Muslims. The
yeah,
absurdity that somehow this great historic tragedy, I mean, it fills me with absolute anger because I was a kid at the time,
yeah,
and my relatives were in the war, fighting, and just to think about it, the irony that you are somehow now going to say that Jewish people have an obligation to vote against this guy, and bring up anti-Semitism is really it's disgusting. And again, that I don't know. I'll stop there. But I mean,
well,
I just,
yeah, just
it's
this
a,
week,
yeah.
Mandy Patinkin, the Broadway legend, he and his wife took a photo with Zoran and announced their strong support for him. And if you look on Twitter, or what's now called X, right, that there's all kinds of outrage against them, including from some Jewish pro Cuomo figures who are denouncing them as bad Jews and all this other stuff, right? And it's just kind of like where this insanity that then gets amplified by the algorithms on X and other social media sites and so on. It's just, and then you have people, Cuomo, you have the Murdoch media, right? Murdoch's not Jewish, and he's a rabid supporter of Israel and so on. John Katzimatidis, he's more of a local figure in New York, but he's a major player in the Republican Party, and he's extremely pro-Israel. They all sort of stoke this outrage, and how they feel entitled to speak about someone else's religion is beyond me. I'm not going to do it.
Well, it's actually something in the First Amendment about government not establishing religion. And that part of the Constitution was put in there to prevent one group of Protestants from telling other Protestants about their relation to an Almighty, right? I mean, this was they didn't want the Church of England back. And this was absolutely critical part of the whole American experiment that the government cannot define. what being Protestant is or being Jewish is or anything else. They can't establish a religion. They're
Right.
not supposed to get into it. And now we're in this absurd situation where the government is telling us that if we in any way criticize Israel, which, by the way, the idea of people, not the Almighty, establishing a state and so forth. It was very controversial, to say the least. I would just to point out one little footnote in history. One of the journalists, I don't know if you teach about him in your school, that had a tremendous influence on me as a young person was I.F. Stone, Izzy
Yep.
Stone. And Izzy Stone, who wrote, for PM and others in New York, he's quite popular in those days, a legendary guy. He went in with some of the first ships that brought refugees to Israel. He
Mhm.
reported on that, and he certainly supported the creation of the state of Israel. But at the time of the Six-Day War, I happened to be an editor of Ramparts magazine. I was over there. I went, but I also published Izzy Stone criticizing the occupation and warning this was the end of any kind of idealism for Israel. And so the idea that through government that you can punish people or prevent them from holding office because they disagree with the policies of the Netanyahu government is really a betrayal of the very idea of the Constitution. But I want to get to this other question of the Democrats and relation to this word socialism. Because ironically, and I think this is one reason why Trump is now president, during Trump's first term, he played Roosevelt. Now, I know that's very controversial to say, but it hit me very much at the time, and I wrote this way. He, yes, slow to use the vaccines, but once they got going, gangbusters, and of course it's going to be free because you got dead bodies in Queens and all that stuff. But he did a couple of things. One, because I remember my own family's income was going to be hurt because my wife suddenly wasn't working, and he by a factor of between 3 and 4 times increased unemployment insurance. Now, that may not mean a lot if have a lot of money, but if in fact you suddenly lost your job and you have to live on what was the existing unemployment insurance, you were in trouble. You would lose your house and everything else. You were in trouble. The idea that you were making something closer to what you had been making before was incredible, not noticed enough. But the biggest thing is and yes, the plenty of Democrats supported it, but not everyone, went for mortgage forbearance. And
Mhm.
suddenly, the great fear economically, and this is where the Democrats are just so out of touch with what real most Americans, if they got any asset at all, it's in their home. If they're going to go bankrupt in a pandemic because they can't make the mortgage, not only are they going to have to take their kids out of school, move, their life is going to be a disaster, but they're going to lose whatever savings they have. We live in a society, as you know, where three of these fat cats have as much income as 50% of the population wealth, not income, wealth. Okay. So in the pandemic, the question was if you lost your home, you're going to lose whatever you're going to pass on to your kids, whatever is going to take you through old age. So this mortgage forbearance, which he went along with, certainly, where you don't have to pay back until you sell the home
Mhm.
was as Roosevelt an idea, an FDR New Deal an idea that I can think of. This is, and when you think about why the Democrats lost the working class, and by working class, I include white collar workers and, lots of folks who teach even in colleges, and particularly the non tenured ones, which is 80% of the teachers, they don't understand. They have not come to grips why Trump was reelected, and what now is happening, the reason there's so much hostility on the right to this so-called socialist, he's come up with what Bernie Sanders did, which is a progressive populism, right?
You're talking about Mamdani.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think if
Well, that's the point of your book, I think.
right, well,
Let's get back to the book.
well, okay,
Yeah.
but just with Trump, I would just make a quick point that in 2020, if many people think that if he had given a second pandemic stipend relief check, he may have actually won, but Mitch McConnell and company talked him out of that, and that was who knows what could have happened? That's counterfactual at this point. So anyway, but yes, Mamdani is clearly an heir to Bernie and makes that uh, point direct in their appearances together. And I'm saying that this Bernie is what inspired him to go into politics. Bernie's run initially in 2016, and then he started campaigning for assembly at Bernie's event in Long Island City in Queens in the fall of 2019. And the DSA, New York City DSA, was very in sync with Bernie, and AOC came out of the New York City DSA as well. So that there's a whole I can't pronounce the word trajectory, but that it flows forward through Bernie's 2016 campaign through the current one here in 2025 that I trace in the book. And it's interesting that all kinds of different things could have happened along the way. After October 7th, 2023, and when Hamas incursions in assaults in Israel, the local DSA, was in the crosshairs of the New York Post. They thought they were going to wipe them out, and because of a tweet where they didn't express it was seen as insensitive to the fact that Israeli civilians were killed. They retracted the tweet, but then they forcefully condemned what they declared to be an impending genocide. In fact, Zoran was using that term within 6 days after October 7th. They did a protest outside of Chuck Schumer's home in Brooklyn, in Grand Army Plaza, out at Park Slope, essentially. And he was using that term, right? He was saying this is an impending genocide. He was denouncing the killing of civilians by Hamas, but also saying that Israel was already beginning to initiate an impending genocide. And obviously, things could have gone differently if the Biden administration had stopped Netanyahu, or if Trump had done anything to alter Netanyahu's course in the first part of this year, and so on. And that would have made the DSA look like extremists for saying, "No, this is a genocide," when it actually didn't become that. But they were unfortunately correct. It's not something to celebrate because of the actual fact that it is a genocide. But they stuck to their principles, and and I think what I show in the book is that Zoran's advocacy, this pro-Palestine stance, corresponds with a shift in public opinion that's played out dramatically in New York City, but it's also seen across the country, where there's been a seismic shift away from Israel towards Palestine. And so he sort of rode that wave and helped propel that wave in his candidacy. And now he's at the forefront nationally and internationally of that movement.
The power of your book, and I really do want to stress this, people have got to read this book. And I say it's a very easy, you're a great journalist, and you weave it wonderfully, and it's only 220 pages. I don't know why I keep. Oh, by the way, I like the idea that you have footnotes after each chapter, at least in the Kindle version. I found that very helpful.
Okay.
Is that not the case, or did I misread that? Or
In print, there are actual footnotes at the bottom of the page, but yes,
oh, well, that's even better.
I kept them to
But
a
I
minute.
like it.
Yes.
Well, I like it better because you can actually check them out without breaking the flow of the book. They're a very good publisher. Obviously, they do great work. Your publishing. You've also published with Johnny Temple at Akashic Books, where
Yes.
I've full disclosure. I've also published. So no, there's books are still alive and well, and I'm not anti the electronic version. I think it makes it easy for somebody like me, uh, who still has a full-time job, to actually be able to do something like this and read the book last night. But I do want to recommend it, people reading it, because we need these reference points, and your footnotes really back it up very effectively. And I must say, I learn from it constantly. For instance, I was pretty critical of AOC at this point. I remember I once bought a picture, one of our great local artists had done, and I never actually hung it up because I sort of was disappointed by one thing or another. But you paint her not necessarily on having the courage on Israel, but on other things, as really consistently organizing, being committed to the well-being of ordinary people, caring about these issues. I was impressed by that, and I was sort of forced to spend some time really rethinking whether I've been too hard about her.
Hmm. Well,
Uh,
I think she's a catalyst. I mean, I think if the way to, maybe to look at Bernie first of all is as a catalyst for AOC, and then she's a catalyst for not just Iran, but Julia Salazar, Jabari Brisport, several other NYC DSA elected officials. Alexa Aviles, who's my city councilwoman, and she plays a important role in the book because she was with Zoran at a couple of rallies that I write about, and she brought down the house at one of the big rallies with AOC in right before the primary, where when she name checked or mentioned her support for Palestine, the place went nuts, right? And that just showed the direction of the campaign and where it was going. But yes, AOC. So looking at AOC as a catalyst, yes. So she's not made some decisions we disagree with, but Zoran is going to make decisions where we disagree with, and but he's still moving in the left direction, maybe rather than the right direction, moving in the left direction. But that's so then he's catalyzed. He's got thousands and thousands of young fans that are going to enter politics in whatever way, whether it's electoral politics or community organizing, whatever kind of activism they pursue, right? So that that's the trend is in motion and the ball is rolling, and he happens to be at the forefront right now, but there'll be successors in his wake.
well, this is really an important value of your book because this is not a one-time phenomena, and this is not some exceptional candidate. I mean, he's exceptional and significant, but he's not out of sync with the 90,000 people who may help him. And it's interesting because I'll give credit at the end of this to Diego Ramos, who's our managing editor at SharePost, but he's the first person to tell me about this campaign, and he was volunteering in it. And he's a guy I met at University of Southern California, Annenberg School. He was the managing editor of the Annenberg News. He came out of the journalism program. He was a student in a couple of my classes, but solid journalism, very good journalist, and so forth. And at first, I poo-pooed it. I said, "Oh yeah, well, some people could sound good at one point, and so forth." And he said, "No, no, I've been going there and I'm knocking on doorbells and I'm learning, and it's incredible." And so I thought about it. Then one day he started talking to, I shouldn't be doing this, but I am because I learned from him. And then he said, "But wait a minute, is he going to sell out?" Because that's a great concern of everybody. We've had people about anything. The society specializes in getting people to sell out. That's what Neil Postman and others have written about. The co-option and so forth. That was the big slogan in the '60s: "Don't sell out. Do you sell out?" And we know most people sell out. There's a lot of money to be thrown around. What I found so encouraging about your book is that this guy is really part of a trend, a movement, that there are a lot of people, these young people, Trump likes to dismiss anybody who disagrees with him as a loser.
Hmm.
But what you have in these young people are the winners. These people, they got a good education. They can invent things. They can discover things. They can become successful professionals or what have you. But they're not buying it anymore. They're not buying it because the society is inherently unfair. The society is inherently deeply exploitive of most people. You cannot have three of the three richest people in this country having the wealth equal to half of the population. Where is the American dream? It just,
Yeah.
I mean, spreading the wealth, sharing the wealth is now the most important requirement of the preservation of our democracy. And what you talk about these liberals. So what is the word for them? What are they? I forgot the phrase
Well,
for the sellout. Um,
just the main. You can just say,
neoliberals or
oh,
whatever they are. Yeah,
mainstream.
yeah, yeah. All it is people who sold out. I mean, Bill Clinton. I interviewed Bill Clinton before he was president. I wrote about him. I actually got invited to a White House dinner. Hillary Clinton at one point said I was her favorite columnist. But what are the Clintons? They were sellout artists. They feathered their own nests. They did carried water for the super rich consistently. Why do we have the mess that we have now with the internet? Because they waived all the regulation that would be required for Google or Apple or anyone else. No, we believe, and Adam Smith believed, and every classical economist believed, you have to have competition. You have to have an invisible hand. You have to have a free market. They sold out the free market. Well, a lot of Republicans, what they did it on the banking reform of so-called the collateralized debt obligations and all that they made legal. So what they did is really prevented. They destroyed the New Deal.
Yeah.
Wasn't Donald Trump. They destroyed the New Deal. They did away with all the effective regulation, the Glass-Steagall and everything else. They endorsed the whole military economy and feathering the socialism for the rich and defense industry. And this guy comes along, and I'm still wondering whether you're right in your prediction because I expect to be that the mass media can betray us every time, and I hope worst is not done to somebody after all of what happened to people who have stood up. I went to Brooklyn once, by the way, with Bobby Kennedy
Hmm.
when he
Okay.
was running, when he was senator, and Bedford Stuyvesant he even had was talking like when I was reading your book, I was thinking about Bobby Kennedy because I was there the night he was shot in Los Angeles. I interviewed him just before he went downstairs, and he was talking about very much what Mondavi is talking about now. Bobby Kennedy. And including on foreign policy, by the way, challenging what he and his brother had even supported. So, what I got away from your book, and maybe we'll just take the last 3 minutes to stress it. Your book is not about one person. You list people, their date of birth, what generation they are. You have lots of players in this book. I think it's the great strength of this book is to show us it's not a one hero book or a one character book. You get into what is a movement, and it's not an ideological movement. It's a movement of concern, of despair about what has happened to this country and taking it back to New York, the impossibility, the impossibility of people who don't set out to get super rich and succeed to live in this major, wonderful city. When I was growing up in New York, I had no doubt, working in the post office, that I could continue to live in the city. And even if I stayed in the post office, which I considered, have a decent life. That's
Well,
over now.
yeah, a lot of people doubt whether they'll be able to stay in the city. And a lot of people, in fact, have been moving out over the last couple decades as things have gotten so expensive, multi-thousand-dollar rents per month. Although that doesn't seem to trouble Andrew Cuomo. He's paying $8,000 a month per rent, and he has $5 million in consulting revenue last year, and so he's doing well. But he only pays lip service to affordability. I mean, and he's only doing that because Zoran made that the issue, the defining issue in the campaign. So I just want to make sure before we wrap it up that we get the book full title. I don't think we've mentioned the full title yet.
Oh,
It's
show the book. Do you have the book there?
Run Zoran Run.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
the publisher is orbooks.com. And I really appreciate your support and kind words for the book, Bob. You're a hero.
Well, let me just say, this could be a major marker, your book, and if he wins, and then he goes on to do what we're doing, you have written the most important book, maybe, of this period, because we are in deep despair now. We don't have models. We don't know what to do. I know a lot of people say they've given up on politics. So, I don't think we have that choice. So you give up on politics, we'll be having this conversation in a concentration camp. Politics is not going to give up on you. You'll be tortured by it. So, what I got out of this book, and the reason I stayed up all night reading through it, is it's a book it made me more optimistic than I've been in the last 3 years or whatever it has been, maybe the last 20 years. Because if this guy, and what I want to repeat, you show it's not a one act show, it's not a one time show, it's not a flash in the pan. This guy represents a new consciousness in America, a new possibility, a new movement in America that does not just reside in him and his personality and whether his character or anything else. It could save democracy. And that's a tall order, but it actually, this could be the campaign. If it goes well and he performs well and keeps his coalition together and keeps the enthusiasm going, this could be the most important moment, actually, politically, of certainly of this century so far. And this could be the saving grace of American democracy. So my hat's off to you for writing what is certainly the best book on the whole thing and a must read. So on that note, yes,
I don't
you
think I
want
can.
to,
I don't think I can top that.
okay.
So I'm going to let you have the last word.
Uh, Okay, and so let me, for the last word, thank Joshua Shear, our producer, who and brought you to this program and insisted how important it was. And then we want to thank Diego Ramos, who's the first person that I talked to, our managing editor of Shear Post, who was actually volunteering in this campaign and took me to school. I'm his old professor, took me to school on how this was really different. This was really a game changer
And
and
he's
he's
from
not
Queens.
ideological. Huh?
He's Diego's from Queens.
Yes, yes.
Yes,
And he went to one of the good
from Astoria.
high
Yeah.
public high schools, Townsend Harris, and so he's a beneficiary of the old New York. Uh, Townsend Harris was a big influence on City College as well, and yes, he's a Queens guy. And he's returned. He didn't get suckered into staying in California. He's there. And I want to thank Max Jones, who puts this up on video. Again, another young former student of mine who has the optimism to and works now with Chris Hedges a lot on making this better. So not selling out has become now a big important theme, and supporting and people participating in this campaign, whatever however they're making their living. Many of them have other opportunities, other things they can do to feather their nests, but that they're hitting the streets, ringing doorbells to do this is really, I say it's the most positive experience we've had in a long time. So again, I want to thank you for recording it, analyzing it, and you do it in a really, I think, compelling way. So it's a joy to be able to have this kind of conversation. And hopefully you're right about the result. I don't know if that endangers our tax status or anything, but I think we're allowed to have opinions.
Yeah.
And I think this is a sign of hope. So, all right,
All right.
take care.
All right.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks again, Bob. Take care.
Yeah.
Bye.